Hello, and thank you for attending today's webinar presented by Michael Rothschild, Senior Manager, Product Alliances at Vormetric. Vormetric is a Nutanix Elevate Alliance partner, and they play a key role in securing data on the Nutanix Enterprise Cloud Platform. We're excited to have Michael presenting today. You'll notice a Q&A box to the bottom right hand of your screen. Please type your questions in the box and hit submit throughout the presentation. Michael will answer your questions live at the end of the webinar. So with that, I'll turn it over to Vormetric. Michael, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, and thank everybody for joining, whether you're listening to the live or soon-to-be recorded line. Very happy to have you today, and happy to be partnering and speaking with Nutanix as part of our solution. One of the things that I'd like to cover today is a very beefy topic, and it's something that's been dealt with for a long time, but with things constantly changing, we always need to do kind of the self-check to make sure that we are, in fact, making sure that our most sensitive, valuable information, namely our data, is secured. We see almost on a daily basis that there are constant breaches, constant non-compliance issues with organizations that are trying to do the right thing, but perhaps just forgot that they have to secure certain things, and when technologies change, these vulnerabilities become even more apparent. So what we'll cover today is specifically talking about data at rest. Data in motion, many people are very familiar with, but what happens as we continue to build new data streams, big data, virtualized data, what do we do? So we're going to talk about three approaches to effective data security, and not surprisingly, all of these approaches are covered by the Vormetric Nutanix partnership. So without further ado, let's get started. So one of the things that we looked at the beginning of this year is something called the Data Threat Report. This is a report that we commissioned by the 451 group, and Nutanix was a sponsor for this, and we take a look at different types of vulnerabilities. And you can see, and this is probably not surprising to anybody on this call, that organizations, despite everything they've been doing now for decades in the way of security and compliance, they still feel vulnerable. 91% feel vulnerable across the globe. And you can see the regional breakouts here, but the scary number here is that with everything we do, 34% of those polls felt that they were very vulnerable, meaning that an attack was imminent or that some non-compliance event was imminent. So people still are quite worried about it, and I call this the motherhood and apple pie slide because I think everybody's aware of this. Let's talk a little bit about why that happens and what we can do about it. So one of the things that has continued to change over time is the amount of sensitive data we have. I can guarantee without polling everybody on this call that at least half of the people on this call are wearing a Fitbit, or they have a Nest type of product where you have a network-based thermostat in your house. These things are transferring tremendous amounts of data. Just with those two examples, they're transferring through the Internet. So lots of big data, lots of sensitive data that is constantly happening. If you take not only about all of that sensitive data, but think about where it's going. It's more users in more geographically distributed places. Those users are more heterogeneous. Just think about your own network where, 10 years ago it might have just been subcontractors and employees that were on the network. Today it's subcontractors, employees, suppliers. You may have billing connections. You may have connections with a CRM and so much more. Everybody's connecting to your network. They're using more cloud-based products in more locations on more devices, and many of those devices are third-party and unmanaged devices. Again, we're not going to cover data in motion today, but think about where all of that data is going to. And that's the big question. At this point, we used to say, okay, we know that all of this data is going to one of two or three different data center locations. But today, more and more, we're storing a whole lot of information in the cloud. And just think about the CRM application that you're using today. It's probably not based on site. It's probably in the cloud. So with all of that, sensitive data is truly distributed and is in fact everywhere. And most often it's in places that we don't even know. If we had to physically locate it, we couldn't find it. So with all of that, we really there are two places that we're going to really intersect in terms of the Nutanix and Vormetric solution. So we're specifically going to talk about how we can secure data using encryption. and we'll spend a little bit of time on that. And, of course, we're talking about data at rest. And the other thing we're going to talk about is once you secure your data, there are keys that are associated with that. So what is happening with your keys? Where are the keys being managed and stored? And there are a few other compliance issues we're going to talk with. So throughout the presentation, I just want you to kind of take a snapshot of this in your mind, that the two major intersection points where the Nutanix Vormetric partnership, where that technology alliance happens, is both in terms of encrypting your data and then where you're storing the keys. And of course, this is whether it's physical, virtual, or in many of our cases, a hybrid type of organization. So the first question we have is, well, encryption has been around for a very long time. It's not a super new technology. We've seen it for many years. And there's two types of data that we really need to encrypt. So the first and perhaps most common is on the left-hand side of the slide when we talk about data in motion. This is happening between devices. I mentioned before third-party and unmanaged devices. Today it can happen between, something you wear on your wrist like a Fitbit and a network, or your phone, wireless, et cetera. And typically when we talk about data in motion, we're using very familiar technologies which include SSL, SSH, HTTPS, and IPsec types of encapsulation. But when we talk about data at rest, this is something that perhaps many organizations are a little bit less familiar with, how exactly it works and what it does. And when we talk about data at rest, we're talking about encryption, as I mentioned. We can also be doing tokenization and data masking. And when we talk about specifically data masking, the best example I can give of this is when you call into let's say your insurance company, and they say, well, give me the last four digits of your Social Security number in order to identify yourself. Well, that's because they don't have the first series of numbers. That information is masked because the only thing they need is perhaps the last four digits of your Social Security number, and that with a whole bunch of other information will authenticate you. This ensures that operator cannot later take your Social Security number and send it someplace else. When we talk about tokenization, this is being able to take information like your street address or your birth date or something else and changing it into a token. So again, that sensitive data isn't there. So when we talk about data at rest, we're specifically applying things like encryption, tokenization, and data masking either at the disk level, at the file system level, and at the application and database level. And they all have specific applications. They're all used in specific use cases. And we'll talk just a little bit more about that in just a slide or two. So we talked a little bit about encryption. We talked about the different areas of encryption, specifically disk, file, and application. And as you kind of go up the stack that I have listed here, complexity increases. So, having a self-encrypted drive is relatively easy in terms of its complexity, but getting all the way up to the application and database level, this is, very desired encryption in many instances, depending on the data, but it also becomes more complex in a traditional environment. At the same time, as complexity goes up, it tends to be a little bit more secure. When complexity is low, the security tends to be a little bit lower. Again, each of these have specific use cases. So if I build out this slide, when we talk about things like application database encryption, the specific technology that we would be looking for is application level encryption, which many vendors refer to it as such. It can be TDE, data masking, and tokenization, whereas when you're talking about file system encryption, this is specifically file encryption with access control. So you're not only encrypting the files, but you're also controlling who has access to that. In other words, in a healthcare organization, doctors have very different access to patient files than, let's say, a nurse or a dietitian or even your insurance company. And when we talk about disk encryption, this is specifically full disk encryption. And many of the laptops that the audience is working on right now has full disk encryption built in today. This is something that is very common in many endpoint devices. And the reason for that is once the machine is shut off, and let's say you throw your laptop in your trunk and you go out to dinner and God forbid somebody steals your laptop, if that laptop is not powered on, and they don't have the proper credentials, that information remains encrypted. Even if the thief takes your hard drive out of your computer and puts it in another computer, it remains encrypted as long as the credentials aren't there. So once it's powered off, it cannot be used again. So when we talk about these different areas, each of these help with different types of breaches. As I mentioned, when we talk about disk encryption, that protects your media on your laptop. Whereas file system encryption specifically deals with different types of threats, which can be either an external threat, somebody that comes into your network masquerading as being somebody else. They may have gotten the credentials through phishing or farming or even spear phishing. Or it can actually be the insider threat, or what we call a privileged user. This is somebody inside the organization that has taken information that really they have access to, but it's not being used for the right purpose. A really good example of this that a sales VP told me about a while ago is that he could tell very often when somebody was about to tender their resignation in sales, because the first thing they saw was a tremendous download of information from a CRM application. So basically, this salesperson that was about to leave had access to information and was downloading it to take it to the next job. So in some cases, these types of abuses can happen, and that is specifically access control and file system encryption. And when we get to the application level, this is specifically guarding against things like SQL injections and database admins that may be doing the wrong thing. So as you can see, different use cases for different types of encryption. Where do we intersect? Where can Nutanix and the Vormetric partnership really help you? There are two specific areas that we deal in, and we'll talk about the three types of encryption or three methodologies for encryption. As the title for the webcast had suggested, there are three different things that you can do to help secure your environment. And specifically where we work with Nutanix on is around full disk encryption, where we work on the key management side, and then the file system encryption, which is really using transparent encryption. And that transparent is super important in mentioning it to you and to your users, in that nothing changes from a user experience. Nothing changes from that type of journey. So it truly is transparent in the background. And using both transparent encryption and key management, this covers 90% of the use cases. We really hit the Nutanix and Vormetric partnership really hit that encryption sweet spot, where if you deploy the transparent encryption key management, it solves 90% of the use cases. It's easy to deploy at a very low cost and lower complexity, and at the end of the day, it does give you ubiquitous coverage for all of your sensitive data that's at rest. So just to dive into these three areas a little bit more carefully, the first area we talk about being able to secure your data is when using a self-encrypted drive. So Nutanix has the self-encrypted drives, and the question is, where are you managing your keys? What are you doing with your keys? So with a KMIP interface, which is a standard protocol, we're able to provide the external key management, managing your keys away from the data. So it's a very simplified key management. It provides high availability. You can see I have the two boxes there, so if one goes down, the other one is seamlessly available. And this can be also operated in a multi-tenant operation, so you can have different tenants there that and use different keys for them. The nice thing is, not only does it help you from a security perspective and ensuring that your information is encrypted, but from a compliance perspective, many compliance regulations require your keys to be separate from your data. So this provides a really good compliance use case, as well as a security use case that you can use for your different self-encrypting drives. The second area that we're going to talk about is around Vormetric transparent encryption, and this is a little bit more of a complicated slide, but at the end of the day, what we're really showing here is whether you have root users or a super user, you have different users in there that are accessing or sending information. Information gets encrypted. And the way it basically works is, if you can see over on the left-hand side of the screen, there's a little black box there. That little black box is known as the Vormetric DSM. It's a data security manager that essentially pushes policies. The V's that you see are agents which can sit on the file system, or in this case, sit on the virtual machines, Nutanix virtual machines. And what happens is, as information from the privileged user goes in, as information from approved users go in, that information becomes encrypted. The root users, the super users are blinded to it, and at the end of the day, all of this information gets encrypted and is stored in a way that it is secure and only available to authorized people that actually need to get that information, such as whether it's an approved process or an approved user. And then finally, one of the areas that we'll talk about in just a couple of minutes is not only does our Vormetric Data Security Manager that can be deployed either virtually or physically, not only will that provide the rule sets as to who should be approved, who shouldn't be approved, so on and so forth, but we also gather information that can be sent up to your SIM, and a whole series of different SIMs that we submit information to. So the real question is, well, what's the value there? Shouldn't my SIM be doing that? But one of the things that we're looking at is, traditionally a SIM is looking outside. It's looking from the inside out for bad users or bad processes that are happening outside. But today the question really becomes, where is the outside? There is no outside. There's no data center anymore. And even if you do have a data center, in many cases the information is virtual, so there really is no perimeter. So what the SIM is looking is actually on the inside for privileged users or the insider threat, and it's an additional feed that can be fed into your existing SIM and provide you with additional information as to whether there is some type of insider threat or insider mischief that's going on that can make you susceptible to either a security threat or a compliance breach. So really, with the solution that I have drawn out here, is there are three major areas that we work with when we talk about Vormetric transparent encryption on Nutanix. One is, as you can say, the encryption. The other one is controlling the access, whether it's a privileged user, approved process or user, or somebody that shouldn't be seeing that information. And then the third area is around security intelligence, and those are the three major areas that VTE covers. Over here we have a little bit more for those people that are technical on the call. This is a little bit more detail into how the actual application workflow works in a specific area around credit. I'm not going to delve into a whole bunch of detail, but we are making these slides available after the fact, and you can actually use this to see, how encryption is going to work, how it works with the DSM, how it may work with your existing products, so on and so forth. So the idea here is you cannot, if you want to, you can apply transparent encryption across all the files, or you can go into specific application encryption workflows. So if you have specific applications that you want to do encryption in, whether it's a format preserving type of database file or not, both of those are available. The real question that I get asked a lot is, well, so let's say you're encrypting it, what's the big deal about format preserving? And if you think about the way a lot of databases are still constructed today, is that in many cases, if you were to change, let's say, a 10-character field to 8 characters with the encryption, it will actually break the entire database. And it takes a lot of work to have to put that back together. So in many cases, when we're talking about specific applications that required a fixed field in the database, we can do the encryption and maintain that, in this case, 10-character field size, so your database retains its integrity and nothing is broken as far as that goes. And you can see here the actual flow that happens. There's a credit card that comes in to the application server. The DSM applies its encryption, and you can see that the original file maintains its file format and goes on its way. So again, we're not breaking the database. And here we go. We're storing it within the database file, within the big data or file storage, as an encrypted file, in which case the original data that was there just got changed and got encrypted, and it is secure. So we talked a little bit about SIM. We talked a little bit about security intelligence. And over here, this is a real-life example of information that we're pushing up to a SIM, specifically in this case Splunk. And what we can see here is while we continue to do what we normally do in terms of encryption, in terms of key management, we can also look inside files. And again, this is a real example where you can look inside the packet and see specific things. So if we were to send this feed up to a SIM like Splunk, we could see here that there was an admin that had spoofed somebody else and tried to gain access, read access to a specific file. That could have been any type of secure file, whether it be payroll information or a confidential customer or patient information or something else. Once we see that, again, internal threat here, they are denied access. Obviously, that information is logged and that is, shown as an alarm within the SIM product. So when we talk about the ability to do security analytics, some of the players that we work with are over here on the left side, on the right side of the screen. But essentially, whether it is, a root user, an unauthorized user, or somebody that's spoofing their way inside the organization as an internal user, we can not only audit that information, we can also obviously block that information and working in cooperation with a SIM vendor. So I gave a lot of information today, and one of the things and I'm happy to take questions in just 2 minutes, so please start putting your questions into the presenter chat at this point. But really what we covered today is talking about data at rest. Data at rest very often is data at risk simply because that's where the crown jewels are. That's where all of your information is. So it's not enough to secure your information from external users, or it's not enough to secure your environment, with a perimeter type of protection. But really what we've gotten to at this point is being able to secure the information that is not only in motion, as we have in the past, but also at rest. We specifically do this in two key areas. One is around encryption, and whether you use a file-based encryption or transparent encryption, that is one area. And the second area is being able to manage your keys separate from your data. Both of these cover two really distinct areas. One is around the security element, securing your data, and the other one is around the compliance area. And as I mentioned, one of the major areas for the Vormetric and Nutanix partnership is specifically to help secure the Nutanix data and also to be able to provide key management in a KMAP form when you're doing self-encrypting drives. It's something we've been working on together for many years. We have many good use cases around these types of deployments in a variety of different verticals. So it's not something that's new. It's not something that's being tested for the first time where you're going to be a beta user, but instead you can join the growing list of companies that are deploying both Vormetric as well as Nutanix together as a complete, truly tested, truly road-tested, battle-tested, whatever euphemism you want to use, in real-world environments. So with that, I have the couple of solution briefs up on the screen right now. One is specifically around talking about the encryption portion, and the other one is specifically talking about the key management portion. And you can download that, and it's available. We have a whole bunch of attachments and links that are available today, and we're going to make a couple more available after the webcast, which includes this presentation. The last thing I'd like to say before I open the questions, if you'd like to hear any part of this again, we're going to send out a link immediately after, about a half hour after the presentation. But more importantly, if you have any colleagues that you think would benefit from this information, that link will be available, and certainly share it with them. So with that, I'd like to open the floor to any questions. Okay, and one of the questions that I have that just popped up was around high availability. The question really focuses around what if the DSM that pushes the information goes down, what happens? So the answer is that the DSMs, the Data Security Manager, that push policy, are actually, not surprisingly, deployed in an HA type of environment, high availability. And if one of those should go down, the other one takes over. Now, assuming that, let's say, the connection should go down and the DSM is located in another place from your servers or virtual servers, those agents would continue to operate with the current configuration. And when the connection is reestablished, any updates would occur. So it's not like all of a sudden this will go down and you're not getting encrypted, or you can't get a hold of your data, or your keys are missing, or anything of that nature. So it continues to operate as normal until that connection is reestablished. Okay, then the next question seems to be around, I'm just reading the question here. It's around specifically the key management portion. And the question becomes, and I guess this is more of a European question, is around data residency. So the question is, will key management, will having the keys supplied in a specific country help for data residency, making sure that the data is there even though it may be someplace else? And this is kind of a gray area that I'm going to punch just a little bit on. There are two differing opinions, and there are 180% differing opinions. One say that if you keep the keys in the country where data residency is required, that is enough to fulfill data residency. The other school of thought is no, that the actual data, in addition to the keys, have to remain in country. So what I would suggest with that is, certainly talk to your compliance office on that, because we are getting differing opinions on that, and there are differing deployment scenarios, or different, I should say, different customers that are deploying differently based on their interpretation of that compliance role. Okay. Any other questions before we end the call? Okay. I think that's we'll make it a wrap for today. If anybody has any questions, you can certainly use my contact information, contact me directly, or you can certainly contact Mike Penrod, the good folks at Nutanix. We're happy to provide any additional information, whether it's on individual products or, more importantly, the joint solution. I'd like to thank you all for joining today, and have a good rest of the week. Thank you very much.